Hi guys, I'm Leah and I chose to do my behaviorist biography on Charles Catania. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about his educational and his professional history, things that he studied, and why he is impactful to the field of applied behavior analysis. So let's get started. Here we have his educational background. So he started at Columbia College to get his bachelor's degree in 1955 to 1958, and then he later moved on to Harvard University from 1960 to 1962 to get his PhD in psychology. After that, he worked as a professor at NYU, or New York University, from 1964 to 1973, and after 1973, he moved to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where he worked as a professor up until 2008, and during that time he retired from teaching, but he's still affiliated with the university and still is actively doing research. So I think that's so awesome. He has had an incredibly long career as a researcher, professor, and a student, so I think he's someone who's super interesting to research. As I mentioned, Charles Catania studied and worked at Harvard University, and he actually was a student of B.F. Skinner's. So he worked under Skinner while he was getting his PhD, and here he worked in a lab with him. And they studied pigeons. They did a lot of animal studies, so mainly pigeons, and they studied their key pecking behaviors alongside reinforcement schedules. So they studied a lot about variable and fixed ratio interval schedules, things like that, and just like how the reinforcement affected the likelihood of behavior to occur again. So that was a main factor of their study, and it influenced a lot of his later work in reinforcement. So I think that's a very important key figure to point out there. Additionally, they studied aggressive behaviors in pigeons, and they found that aggressive behaviors could be maintained by reinforcement scheduled of conditioned and unconditioned stimuli. So I think even now we're looking at a lot of our kiddos who we work with in ABA and looking at aggressive behaviors. We can use some of their research from the 1960s and 1970s to help us diminish these undesired behaviors and create more safe habits. So yeah, that's just a fun little point that he studied under B.F. Skinner, and that is a lot of what he's known for. Okay, moving on. So I know I mentioned that they did a lot of pigeon key pecking schedules, and I just wanted to pull one of the studies. So it's called a quantitative analysis of the responding maintained by interval schedules of reinforcement. So here is a graph. So the top two data points of the present FI data, FI data and the present VI data are looking at what Catania's study was. So he's comparing his study to Schoenfeld and Cumming and Farmer's studies. So they're looking at fixed interval and variable interval data, and you can see all three of the variable interval data from Catania, Schoenfeld and Cumming, and Farmer are all at the top, so there's more responses per minute when reinforced with variable interval data than with fixed interval data. So basically they found, or his results were consistent with the finding that reinforcement was most effective when delivered at times in an interval rather than a simple fixed interval schedule. So I think while a lot of this is common knowledge now, it's his foundational work that helped us get there. So he did many studies like this just about reinforcement and a lot of pigeon studies, key pecking studies, just to see what the best practice is and what the most effective reinforcement schedule is. And so a lot of his influential studies have led us to where we are today in ABA, so I think that's super awesome as well. Moving on, we're going to look at his history in applied behavior analysis. So a lot of his earlier studies, like I mentioned, were about reinforcement schedules and animal studies. So moving forward, you see he was at NYU from 1964 to 1973 and started teaching at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 1973 up until 2008, where he still is conducting research. So being a professor this long and working with students and researching them like this, it's natural for your interest to switch. So a lot of his later works were about how to improve educational settings and how to increase positive behaviors in an educational setting. So I'm going to talk about two studies that have academic and social implications on ABA that Catania was a part of. So the first one is Catania and Shemoff in 2001. They conducted a study on their own class at UMBC. So they looked at the relationship between class attendance and overall academic performance in the class. So basically, they had a class with X number of students, and they told them ahead of time. They said, we're going to be taking data on who comes to class and who's not, and that's all they told them. And there was no extra credit, no points or anything. It wasn't graded for them to come to class. It was simply to see who was coming and who wasn't. And they found that the students who came to class more often had higher final grades, and they also scored higher on the exams and quizzes and just overall assignments. So they found a strong positive correlation between class attendance and grades. So I think that's interesting. I think it's super cool that they were able to do that on their own students, and just yet again providing another important piece of educational literature on how to increase positive behaviors, and in this case the behavior would be the grade. Another study that just came out this year, actually, so that kind of shows your how long he's been in the field and how dedicated he is to it. This is about differential reinforcement, and this is actually about elementary aged kiddos. So the main findings here were that differential reinforcement in the form of verbal specific praise is an effective strategy for teachers to increase positive behaviors from students. So yet again, another important piece of literature just stating the importance of differential reinforcement and specifically how that is given. So they said the form of verbal specific praise. So if you're a teacher and you're finding that some of your students aren't exhibiting the behaviors that you would like to be seeing, then maybe you could try verbal specific praise, and this is proven to be an effective strategy by Catania and his other researchers. So I like to include this one just because it shows that he's still very active in the field of ABA, and it's still providing positive social implications for teachers, students, parents, things like that. I think it shows his dedication to the field, that he's still, after all this time, still working in it and still trying to make a difference and create positive change. Another reason why I originally chose Charles Catania to do this project on is because I'm local to the Maryland area, and he works with an autism clinic here that I work for. And he does, in his segment, it's called Innovation Thursdays, where he serves as a mentor for my company. And he does, it's like a Zoom call, and each month he does one paper, basically, where he breaks down his studies and just explains things and is there to answer questions from anyone who needs them. And I think that's another great example of how he is willing to help young professionals in the ABA community with his knowledge and time that he's dedicated to it. So I think he's a super interesting guy, and I really love learning about him, so I hope you have too. Thanks.